Alright guys, hey, let's talk about cell transport and getting across cell boundaries. So once the molecules have gone through all their chemical digestion processes, breaking them down into their individual components, their monomers, whether it be an amino acid, a glycerol or monoglyceride, or a free fatty acid or a monosaccharide, they've got to get across those cell boundaries into the cells or moving through cells to get to the bloodstream or the lymph, depending on what it is. So let's talk about how those things get across. First one, let's look at passive diffusion.
Water, fats, fat-soluble vitamins, and small molecules such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, and alcohol move easily across cell membranes.
Okay, just mentioned several things that can move across the membrane requiring no energy. So anytime you see this tag word passive, they're talking about it does not need energy at all whatsoever. And anytime you see diffusion, that means it's moving from where there's a lot of it on one side of the membrane, or from where there's an area of high concentration, high amounts, to areas of low amounts. You can see on the bottom here there are no molecules here. So passive means no energy required. Diffusion means moving from areas of high amounts or concentrations to spreading out to areas of low amounts.
In a process called passive diffusion, these substances move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, either by diffusing directly across the cell membrane or through a protein channel embedded in the membrane.
Now you can see these things here represent lipids or fat-soluble molecules, and they can slide right between these phospholipids in the membrane because they are nonpolar, just like these tails are nonpolar. Anything that is polar or has a charge has to use a protein channel or a gateway or a doorway or a bridge, if you want to call it that, to get across. Because again, anything with a charge will not be allowed to pass through this nonpolar region. Alright, let's go take a look at facilitated diffusion. Again, this is diffusion, meaning it's going to go from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. And from this, we can also infer, even though it doesn't say passive, it's diffusion, it doesn't require energy as well. Facilitated, though, means to help, and I want you to see this.
Some substances, such as fructose molecules, need a little assistance to enter and exit cells. Proteins embedded in the cell membrane lightly bind to these substances and then change shape to allow the substance to move across the cell membrane.
Okay, that's the difference between facilitated diffusion and passive diffusion using a channel protein. Channel proteins just act like tubes or tunnels that allow things to move through. They don't undergo what's called a conformational change. A conformational change means they actually mold to the molecule that's coming in, and then they change shape to release it on the other side. Again, to facilitate means to help. So this protein is helping this molecule get across, even though it's still diffusing, going from high concentrations or high amounts to low amounts, requiring no energy. So it's still considered a form of passive transport. So again, that's facilitated diffusion.
This process is called facilitated diffusion. In facilitated diffusion, substances are moved from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration.
Now, this term transmembrane just means it's a protein that runs or that extends from one side of the membrane to the other. There are other ones called integral proteins or peripheral proteins. We'll take a look at later on in this course. But right now, transmembrane just means it's a protein found in the membrane that runs from one side all the way through to the other. Let's take a look at active transport.
Some substances, such as amino acids, need a lot of assistance to enter and exit cells. In addition to a protein in the membrane to serve as a carrier, energy in the form of ATP is also needed.
Okay, so ATP is needed. That's why it's called active transport. It's active because it requires energy in the form of ATP to get these molecules across. Now, the unique thing I'm sure it's getting ready to tell you here in a minute is that active transport can move things from there's low amounts to areas where there's already high amounts. It doesn't have to rely on diffusion to get it across. It moves it in the opposite direction a lot of times, and that's why it needs energy. It needs energy because it's moving it uphill, I guess, against the gradient across the membrane.
This type of absorption is called active transport. Active transport moves substances against the concentration gradient. Many minerals, including calcium and iron, cross cell membranes by active transport. The sugars glucose and galactose are also transported across cell membranes in this way.
And there's your definition for what active transport is. Again, depending on the situation, sometimes molecules can move across using facilitated diffusion or active transport if they're polar or have a charge, like glucose and amino acids, things like that. Excuse me, these are amino acids. Hope this helped you guys. Use it to review, to understand how these things are going to get into our cells and cross cell boundaries so we can use them.